the AI for Good Global Summit, convened by ITU, recognizes the joint responsibility of governments, the private sector, United Nations agencies, academia and others to ensure AI reaches its full potential while preventing and mitigating harms.
And it's a moment that calls for action. And today I'm calling on each of you to use this summit to help the world to better understand what kinds of regulations, what kinds of guardrails we need to put in place right now. So together, let's make it innovative, let's make it safe, and let's make it responsible for all. Thank you very much.
Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU, in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations, and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished panelists and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello, friends of AI, Earth and Sustainability. My name is Gustau Camps, and I would like to welcome everyone of you to this new talk in the seminar series of AI for Earth and Sustainability Sciences. This seminar series in the program AI for Good of the ITU is convened by myself, Markus Reichstein, Joachim Denzler, and Maria Piles, and was actually initiated in the context of the Excellence Network ALICE for the development of AI in Europe. First of all, thanks for attending the meeting, all of you. Today we will hear about new opportunities and applications of machine learning in many different fields, in particular of biophysical parameter estimation. It is my absolute pleasure to present our speaker today, Dirk Wegner. Jan actually holds the data science chair of the Institute of Computational Science, University of Zurich, and he's an associate professor and head of the Ecovision lab at the ETH Zurich. And Jan's work actually revolves around machine learning, computer vision, and remote sensing to solve many pressing scientific questions in the environmental sciences and geosciences. And Jan has been awarded multiple times, and he's vice president of ISPR's technical committee, and he has now holding the director of many important institutions, among them like the Graduate School in Data Science at the University of Zurich, and also part of the CVPR Earth Vision Workshop series. In today's talks, as I told you before, we will see novel applications of deep learning and high-resolution imagery to estimate crucial parameters, from snow depth, mapping crops, biomass, and vegetation height. With further ado, welcome and thank you for being with us today, Jan. And over to you. Really looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gustau, for the very kind introduction. Let me share my screen. All right, welcome everyone to this talk on large-scale monitoring of nature with deep learning, how I called it. And in this talk, I will present 3 different projects in my team that were implemented in collaboration with the ETH team of Konrad Schindler. And those will touch on this SDGs, 2, Zero Hunger, 9, Industry Innovation Infrastructure, 13, Climate Action, and 15, Life on Land. So let's take a look at the 3 different projects. So in the first part of the talk, I will talk about the high-resolution snow depth estimation from satellite imagery and show you how we can do this from satellite images. In the second part, I will present work on fine-grained crop classification at country scale, and country scale in this case is Switzerland, so that's not a huge country, but the potential is there to expand this much further beyond. And in the third part, I will talk about global vegetation mapping with JEDI full waveform LiDAR data and Sentinel-2, and also show some interesting applications that are building on top of this. So let's start with the first project on snow depth monitoring in Switzerland. And this project was funded by InnoSwiss. So that's sort of the funding agency for academia industry funding in Switzerland, implemented by Rodrigo Calle-Daud, who was a postdoc on the ETH PRS team, who developed and implemented this approach. And what he did is that the goal of this project was that in Switzerland, we have a lot of hydroelectric power plants to produce electricity. And in order to better plan for the energy production, we need to understand how much water is stored in the snow cover. And in the high alpine regions in Switzerland, it snows quite a lot, especially this year and end of last year. There's a lot of snow, which is not only good for skiing, for your leisure time, but very important also then in the spring and the summer and so on to produce hydroelectric energy when the snow is melting. And it's also important to understand this to predict flood water. So, for example, in the recent weeks, we had quite some events, especially in northern Germany, but also a bit in Switzerland. So it's very important to understand how much water is stored in the snow. And then, of course, it's also important for any safety evaluation for snow activities, but also for avalanches that may go down on villages and so on. And the idea was here to have a scalable approach, so really to rely on satellite data that is then potentially can be scaled globally at some point. And also another idea was to use open access data, sort of to not have to pay for each and every new image that is being collected. So we are relying here on the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 synthetic aperture radar sensors, then the Sentinel-2 multispectral optical sensors, and the digital elevation model that is provided by the Swiss Topo, the Swiss Topographic Office. And the goal is that we then compute one homogeneous, dense snow depth map at a 10-meter grid spacing or ground sampling distance every 7 days, so once per week. So the method, in a nutshell, is that we accumulate the satellite imagery in all 7 days and combine them with the DEM. So we basically come up with a cloud-free mosaic of the Sentinel-2 images, and Sentinel-1, of course, is cloud-free by construction, by the radar principle. And then every 7 days, we feed these mosaics, the optical, the SAR, and then the DEM, into a convolutional GRU network. So that's a recurrent neural network. And this extracts the information in the temporal domain, so tracks accumulating snow over time, and also looks, because it's convolutional, for each and every time step at the spatial patterns and the context. And then furthermore, we look into something that is more broadly called trustworthy AI. And here we look at it from an angle of probabilistic regression. So instead of only making pointwise estimates for each and every 10-meter grid cell, we also assign an uncertainty at the prediction time at test time. So then for each and every grid cell, 10-meter grid spacing, we have one snow depth value and also the uncertainty that is associated with the model prediction. And this is actually very important because a lot of safety considerations play into this project. So we need to understand, and the authorities need to understand, how much can we actually trust the predictions of the model. and not only for that, but also for further downstream applications, building on top of that in terms of, let's say, climate models and so on. We need to understand how much can we trust the models, and the uncertainty layer is of utmost importance. So this is an overview of how it works, the method. So we have the digital elevation model. We have the Sentinel-2 composite images, the cloud-free ones. We have the Sentinel-1 composite image, and every 7 days, we feed this to our convolution GRU cell and update the recurrent neural network state. And then we move on and predict and pass on to the next recurrent neural network state. And then we output the predictions, so we output the snow depth map every 7 days and also the uncertainty map. And as reference data here, we have a reference snow depth map from our partners from ExoLabs. So ExoLabs is a startup company in Zurich, a spin-off from the University of Zurich, who work a lot on environmental biophysical parameters from a remote sensing angle. Very capable guys. I can only recommend them. And then what we also have for testing on also to get more high resolution, more high frequency patterns in the snow, we have the colleagues from the SLF in Davos. So that's Swiss snow people and researchers who provided then much more fine-grained and high-resolution reference data, especially around Davos. From aerial campaigns, so airborne campaigns, aerial photogrammetry campaigns, and also UAV campaigns. Yes, and in a nutshell, what we do is probabilistic regression in this case means that we always, instead of a point estimate, we estimate a distribution. So we have a normal distribution that we assume here, and for the normal distribution, a Gaussian distribution, we estimate the mean and the variance. And in preliminary work or experience, we found out that, of course, there's always these two parts, this aleatoric and the epistemic uncertainty parts, that the aleatoric uncertainty part is by far the dominant. And this means that we stick with it for computational reasons. So as to estimate the aleatoric uncertainty, we use the Gaussian negative log likelihood function here for our model. And we did not go all the way and then build an ensemble of 5 to 10 to more models to also estimate epistemic uncertainties. This is something we did in the second and the third work, though, that I will show later on. But here, for computational reasons, we just stick with aleatoric uncertainty and work with the Gaussian negative log likelihood. And this is now one of the results here. So on the left side, you see the snow depth map. Everything bright colored, yellowish, whitish is very high snow depth. You see in the high alpine regions here, next to in the canton of Valais. You see in southern Switzerland, there's a lot of high alpine terrain, and especially here around the Aletsch Glacier and so on, you see a lot of high snow. Then here on the border with France and Italy, you see a lot of high snow towards Mont Blanc and so on. And also in Graubünden here around Davos, Arosa and so on, you see a lot of high snow depth. And here on the right side of the snow depth map, you see the uncertainty map, the variance here, and everything that goes a bit brighter color, light blue, has very high uncertainty, and everything that is darker has low uncertainty. And it's not surprising that the uncertainty increases with higher snow depth. So you see this here. Higher snow depth also leads to higher uncertainties in this case. Yes, and then we compare, of course, and we see that the new results that we get with our convolutional GRU approach contain very fine details of these new accumulations and much finer ones than the previous maps. So on the left side here, you see this temporal composite image of Sentinel-2 that shows here a lot of snow in the mountains. Then this is the previous map that was done by our company partners who use basically spectral indices and some traditional machine learning. And you see that there's a lot of averaging going on. It's very smooth. It's still really nice, and was the first product at the time in Switzerland. But if we now use this new approach that we developed together with Exolabs, then you get a lot of fine-grained and very detailed structures down to very small valleys here in the mountains. And to give you some quantitative results, so I don't want to bore you too much with numbers and many more details. You can read all of this in the paper, of course. But here we get a mean absolute error of around 60 centimeters. And what is especially important, we have almost no bias. So the mean error here is something like 6 centimeters, which is it's really very low, and we can assume that we have almost no bias in our snow depth estimation. Then a bit more fine-grained analysis here. So again, here's 4 examples on the left side. You always see this temporal composite Sentinel-2 image. Then in the center here, you see the previously available map for whole Switzerland. And on the right side, you see our new map that preserves a lot of very fine-grained details. And if we look even a bit more closer, so here another example. This is again a Sentinel-2 tile where you see the snow. Then here, this is the high-resolution reference data that I mentioned earlier that was collected by SLF. So Yves Bühler and his team with a lot of fine-grained texture and analysis from aerial photogrammetric campaigns. And this is the older snow depth product, which is overly smooth. And then this is ours here, which then gets a lot closer to this reference data from the photogrammetric approach. But keep in mind that ours is purely based on Sentinel-2, Sentinel-1, and the digital elevation model. So there's no high resolution airborne photogrammetry involved, unlike here. But still, this gets relatively close. Then for completeness, down here on the left, this is the elevation map that we use as input. And we also compute the residuals of the previous map with respect to the reference data. And then this on the bottom right, you see the results of our map with respect to the reference data. And we see that we get quite much closer to the reference data. But of course, we are not perfect. Yeah, we are far from perfect. So that's not the message I want to convey. There's still a lot of room for improvement on our side. So for some very high snow accumulations, of course, we could do much better. That we still may underestimate or respective overestimate for some other places where there's lower snow accumulation. And here just an example. So now it's a skiing season. If you are based somewhere, if you want to go skiing here in Berner Oberland, this famous place of Mürren, very beautiful place right opposite of the Eiger North face, a beautiful place. If you want to do some ski touring and you plan your ski touring path, like this red line here. So if you look at products that are available across Europe or even globally, then you have a 1 kilometer resolution. There's not much you can deduce from it. The previous map from Exo is already much better. But now if you overlay it to our new map, you see a lot of fine-grained details and you can plan your ski touring accordingly. But as I said, this is, of course, more leisure applications. The real, let's say, connection to the SDGs, and also in terms of climate action is, of course, that you understand, and hydroelectric power generation and so on, is that you understand how much water is then contained in the snow. And this is now provides a lot of really good guidance. Okay, so this was the first of the 3 projects I wanted to present. And on high resolution snow depth estimation from satellite imagery, now I will move on to the second project on fine-grained crop classification at country scale, which we did together and was funded by the Swiss Department of Agriculture. and was done by Özgür Turkoglu during his PhD at the Photogram Remote Sensing Group and Ecovision Lab at ETH Zurich, again together with Konrad Schindler and a lot of other very gifted people, also from the crop science group, Achim Walter and Frank Liebisch and so on at ETH. But the implementation driver of this was Özgür. And here the idea was really that we wanted to have a nationwide, so countrywide, Swiss-wide map of crops. So we want to know what crop is growing where at what time. And you might know this, that Switzerland has a lot of different cantons, so 26 different cantons. And it's often hard to get joint information on a federal level. And this is now one way to accumulate this and have this at a federal level such that policies can be deduced of it and farmers can be better supported and so on. But this approach in general is generic, so you can also roll it out, let's say, across Africa, across whole Europe, if you have enough reference data, because again, like the previous project, this is a supervised learning program, the way we phrased it. And I will now show you how we did it. So for those who are not so used to satellite imagery, we use here the Sentinel-2 satellite image time series, like in the first project description. And the satellites are particularly designed to measure or assess biophysical parameters, especially vegetation parameters. And this is now a plot that shows the spectra on the x-axis versus the ground sampling distance on the y-axis. And you have this for high-res, relatively high-res resolution channels at the 10-meter ground sampling distance, red, green, blue, and the near-infrared. And then you have this vegetation red edge channels at a bit of a lower resolution. Those are the ones that carry most of the evidence for our application here. And you might not know, or maybe you do know, that all the plant species have very specific spectral reflectance characteristics, and this is caused by the plant architecture. So, for example, the leaf angle or the leaf area index. It's also caused by leaf biochemical content, so chlorophyll production differs for different plant species, the leaf structure, the water content, and also, very importantly, the nitrogen content in the context of agriculture. And then, of course, also soil structure plays a role, soil brightness and roughness, depending on where specific crops are planted. And I show you an example here on the right side. So again, on the x-axis, I'm plotting the wavelength in this case. And here on the y-axis, I am showing you the reflectance, depending for different crop types. For example, the red signature here, the spectral signature indicates the carrots, and then the dark blue line indicates sugar beet, and you already see that the red line runs a bit differently from the dark blue one, and even more so from the yellowish one, which is sunflower. Yeah, so you see that if we have only a single satellite image and we look at the spectral properties, then we would have then a very high radiometric resolution, so many different channels. We could already try to classify different crop types based on their spectral signatures. But then there's more. So crops also have different growth cycles. So it's what we call the phenology of the crops and the plants. And this, of course, provides a lot of additional evidence from a time series analysis. So here in this study, we do not only look at a single image to classify crops, but we look at the whole time series of 70, 80 Sentinel-2 images at every point in Switzerland over the season. And this is just to show you the different life cycles. So for winter wheat, for example, that is planted very early in January, and then it's harvested in summer in mid-July, and then, it's harvested here in August. But this is different for maize, for example, which is planted much later in April and harvested in October. And again, sugar beet that is planted around the same time, like maize, but then harvested again a bit later in October and November. And these different growth cycles or the different phenology of plants now provide an additional input signal such that we can confidently classify into different crops. And this is an example here how this is can look like. If you look at the near-infrared channel in the image, so this is the near-infrared channel, the Sentinel-2 image for 3 different examples that have several different crop types. For example, here in the top row, we have a time series here, now examples for 8 different points in time between January 2019 and October 2019. For the olive green, here's winter barley, and this light blue thing is maize. And you see that the reflectance is stronger or less strong depending on the month and the crop type. So you can nicely already distinguish based on only this spectral signature here and how it changes over time between, in this case, maize and winter barley. And then there's more examples. What you also see is that, of course, we have clouds. So this very wide reflectance here are clouds, and sometimes it's completely occluded. So another reason to have a long and dense time series is such that despite the frequent cloud coverage, we can still confidently classify different crop types. And the interesting part here is that we look at a very fine-grained classification. So we do not only look at 4 or 5 main staple crops, but we have 49 and even more crop classes that we want to distinguish. And the problem here is, and it's I would say a general issue, once you move away from just standard computer vision to a real world application, remote sensing and many other studies where you cannot just download more data from the web, is that you end up with a very skewed distribution, very long tail distribution. So most of the area in Switzerland and most of the pixels covered in the satellite images are dominated and covered by only very few classes. So that supports a bit the stereotypes about Switzerland and milk production, cheese and cows. Yeah, so a very large part in Switzerland is covered by meadows and pastures, so grassland. And then we have winter wheat and so on. And then it drains out very quickly. So sunflowers is only the percentage is below 1% of the planted area in Switzerland. And here then the interesting bit was also that we did not only have 2 grassland classes, but we had many more. We had, I think, 15 or 20 different classes of grasslands that we had to distinguish. So, and then there are, of course, different ideas how you can cope with very imbalanced data and still learn sort of a reasonable, well-performing model out of it. And there I will show another approach in the third project. But here what we did is basically the idea that we talked to our colleagues, Gregor Perich and Frank Liebisch from the crop science group at ETH. And based on their expertise, then we divided the classes that we had into different levels of coarseness. So the idea is that we start with a very coarse level, where we classify the entire country of planted area, all crops, into only 5 different classes. And this is field crops, grassland, orchards, special crops, and forest. And then on the next level too, then we subdivide into more fine-grained classes. So for field crops into small grain cereal, large grain cereal, vegetable crop, and so on. The grassland we subdivide into meadow, pasture, and biodiversity area, and the orchards into orchard crops and tree crops, and so on. And then on the most fine-grained level, we end up with the most fine-grained classes that are also that are needed by the Swiss Department of Agriculture, that they use for their reporting and monitoring structure. And there we have the most fine-grained things. And the idea is here twofold. So on the one hand, we want to force the model for very rare classes to already learn features and pull this together, have an embedding at the coarser levels 2 and 1, such that they share the embedding of the features of the rare classes with other classes that are more dominant and occur much more often. So that was one of the ideas. And the second idea comes from a very practical point of view, which says, look, if the model is very uncertain at the most fine-grained level, from the application point of view, very often the Swiss Department of Agriculture, they don't need to know whether it's an apple orchard or a pear orchard. But for them, it's important that they know it's a tree crop, it's an orchard. So they can then still work, although the model is very uncertain at the most fine-grained level, they can still work at the next coarser level, and then maybe manually or interactively fine-tune, or in the worst case, send people out into the field. And now let's look at how this was then implemented, how EarthSquare implemented this into this recurrent neural network structure. And you see here that we have this time series, the input images, and you see here that we encode this at the different levels. So level 1 is the coarsest, then level 2 is the intermediate level, level 3 is the most fine-grained. And this is always exchanging information. And here also, and I don't want to go into too much detail, EarthSquare also came up and developed a new convolutional cell type, because we were unhappy with LSTM and GRU in this case due to vanishing and exploding gradient problems, because we did stack so many layers. So when we started stacking many layers in our RNN, then we had a lot of training problems. So here I came up with a more stable variant, and you can read the technical details in the PAMI paper that is referenced on the first slide of this project description here. So, and these are then the results if we apply it to whole Switzerland. So we trained the deep learning model on the entire crop data set of 2021, and then applied it to satellite images collected in 2022. And for the most fine-grained, so for the third level, we also provided the calibrated uncertainties. And if I remember correctly, again here, I know he also had his ensemble method. So we have aleatoric and epistemic uncertainty. So we have the full uncertainty range. And this was then done for 1.45 million hectares, and in total for 3.3 million field plots. And the interesting part is that those field plots are often very small in Switzerland, so very small. And the number of crop types that EarthSquare classified here is in 553 different classes. And if you look at the accuracy analysis here, depending on the level of coarsest, from the coarsest level, of course, you get the best accuracy numbers. So accuracy is something that does not compensate for the frequency of the class. So this number is, I would say, always if it looks overly optimistic. Still, it gives away that if most of the classes are grassland, we're doing pretty well. Then there's one score provides a much more a transparent measure and factors in much better in the same residual recall, of course, that some classes are only rarely occurring and covering rarely only a small part. And there we are doing much worse. So although we have this hierarchical implementation here, we are still doing much worse on the very rare classes. But I should also mention here that we even have cases, and let's think here in the south of Switzerland, Ticino, where there's some classes that are currently there and that are very rare and that are only occurring 2 or 3 times in the whole data set at all. So some is taking a bit, it's taken a bit to the extreme here too. But still you can see it's a work that is now being implemented by Agroscope, a Swiss agricultural research center here in Zurich, and to be then implemented, rolled out on a national scale and to be used by the Swiss Department of Agriculture. All right, so this brings me now to the third project. So first you heard about snow depth mapping, about how we used an RNN to map snow depth, a time series of satellite mosaics. And the second one is now fine-grained crop classification using a time series of Sentinel-2 optical images. And now the third one won't be about time series, but this is about global vegetation mapping with JEDI LiDAR and Sentinel-2. And some of you who joined the talk of Nico Lang some month earlier might already remember something, but I promise to provide some additional material. So the idea is here that together with our colleagues from the NASA JEDI team, and that we come up with a global map of canopy height. And this was a work that was developed and implemented by Nico Lang, who did his PhD in the photogrammetry remote sensing group, Konrad Schindler here. And the project was funded by Barry Callebaut. And this is the world's biggest chocolate manufacturer based in Zurich. And their original idea, and I will come to this as one of the applications later, was that they wanted to implement sustainable supply chain management, especially for palm oil and also cocoa. And for that, they wanted to know what the biomasses were, following a specific so-called high carbon stock approach, which says everything where a lot of carbon is stored in the forest, that should be left untouched, but everything below a threshold of 35 tons per hectare can be turned into some economic activity, and there it's okay to also then source palm oil, for example. So and this is an illustration of the JEDI airborne, the full waveform LiDAR on the left side, mounted on the International Space Station, which sparsely scans the globe in 8 different beams. And there's quite a distance between the different beams, the long track and the cross track. There's also a couple 100 meters gap between the LiDAR point clouds, and the idea is to use this as reference data. So this product that provides canopy height, use it as reference data to then train a regression model, a deep regression model to predict densely at a 10-meter grid spacing the top canopy height at global scale using optical Sentinel-2 multispectral data as in. And then as output, you have this on the right. So everything bright is high canopy height, everything darkish is much lower. And this is a video now that shows where the JEDI sensor, this full waveform LiDAR sensor, is mounted on the payload module of the International Space Station, looking down on Earth. ISS is orbiting around the globe every 90 minutes, one circle. This is scanning the land surface mostly, and with a 4.2 kilometer SWAT width. And the really cool thing about this is that it's a full waveform LiDAR. And a full waveform LiDAR means that it's not only sending out one chirp and one pulse and then recording a first and a last return, but it's collecting many more returns and storing this in a vector, so 1,000 returns in our case here, for example. And you see that then there's a lot of signal reflected by the top layer of the canopy, then it's a bit less if you go further down, and then there's a ground peak. And this is, of course, a bit as an example and looks very intuitive, but in reality, there's a lot of noise in between. It's much more complex and complicated. And but the beautiful thing is you have a really nice vertical profile through the vegetation, and now you can use this to predict many, many different vegetation variables and biophysical parameters. So it's a fantastic sensor. And what Nico did, and I spare you a lot of the technical details, those are in the paper here that we published together. What he did is then he used CNNs, convolutional neural networks, plus the geolocation as input, and then he trained the models from different random initialization, again optimizing for the Gaussian negative log likelihood, for the aleatoric uncertainty estimation per model. And then he built an ensemble of models to also capture the epistemic uncertainty. And one thing that he did here, because we again ended up with a really long tail distribution. So we had many points when we trained the model with low to medium biomass, but only very few with very high biomass. But the high biomass are actually the most interesting parts, because those are the ones that should definitely be protected and that we should understand most about, also in terms of biodiversity mapping and so on. So what he did then to counter that underestimation, that long tail distribution is especially to counter the underestimation of tall canopies, that he fine-tuned each individual model by weighting of the ensemble, by weighting the samples inverse to the square root of the sample frequency. So which means that the rarer a sample is, the more weight it gets. And he did this for each 5 meter height interval. This is now a plot here of the intervals according to the Jeddah reference height. So if we have the reference height that we use as reference label to train our supervised approach, on the x-axis you have the intervals between 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and so on. Meters canopy height up to 50 meter height. And then here on the x-axis you see the residuals that are plotted. And this is for 4 different variants. So it's if we don't do if you have only a CNN, then if we add the geographic location as an encoding to the CNN, then we balance it using this class frequency inverse reweighting scheme. And finally, if we compute an ensemble, and you see that the final results per interval are this orange plots here. And you see that this works relatively well up to something like 35 meters here, but then still we have a huge underestimation bias once we go to the very high canopy. And at the moment, so there's of course also at some point you have to remember we only use Sentinel-2 data to estimate this, to estimate the tall canopies, and we have not fully understood why there is so much underestimation, but there's multiple things that play a role here. So one is of course on the machine learning side, we need better and smarter ways to work with long tail distributions if we have global loss functions, and we are working on this at my team at the University of Zurich. But on the other hand, is of course also at some point the signal is saturated. If you look on top of the canopy, there's only so much you can actually learn out of optical sensor, and you should turn to, let's say, radar sensors in L-band, or the new missions like the ESA biomass mission or NASA ISAR or NISA mission that have longer wavelength radar signals in L-band and beyond. Okay, and so Nico then computed this global canopy top height map of the year 2020. And you see a lot of interesting patterns. For example, here in the state of Oregon, US West Coast, we have this checkerboard pattern, which I found really funny. And at first we thought this is a mistake. It's an aliasing problem or something, but it turns out that this really exists. It has historical reasons. So when there was the big move west in the US some 200 or 300 years ago, this was split up in a checkerboard pattern, and always one plot, 1 by 1 mile plot was given to the state of Oregon, and then the neighboring one was given to a private landowner. And this is kept until today. If you check it out on Google Maps, you still see this checkerboard pattern. Then Nico also did the uncertainty map, so the predicted standard deviation, which is very valuable. And we check this on the checkerboard pattern. We see that there is no or almost no checkerboard pattern here that can be seen, which then was a great relief for us. And you see that in some parts here, we went way beyond the reference data. So Jeddah flies up to here to northern Germany, and here up here to Seattle or around. And we still predicted further north of that, and you still to Siberia, Norway, and so on, and Alaska. And you of course see that the standard deviation then grows largely, up to the point in Alaska that the standard deviation is in the range of the tree heights that we estimate is basically useless. But this is very important, this uncertainty layer, because exactly this is what it tells us, that in some parts of the world, we should not trust this canopy height map, and we have to collect more reference data. Then came Clémence Lanfranchi, and together with Nikolai Kalishek, and Nico as their supervisors, she did a fantastic master thesis, a very smart person, and then translated this canopy top height map to a global above ground biomass density map at a 50-meter grid spacing. And this is now a biomass map deduced from that, again, plus predicted standard deviation of above ground biomass. And this is now something that we are also following on and working on in my group at the University of Zurich to improve global biomass maps using JEDI data, and then later more and more sensors like ESA biomass and NASA ISO and LISA and so on and so forth. So now I'm coming to the end of my talk. Time is almost up. So I show you some applications. So this is the application that funded basically all of this last research. And this is sustainable palm oil sourcing with a high carbon stock approach. And the high carbon stock approach is an approach that was defined some 10 years back by Greenpeace and the big palm oil companies like Cargill and Sinamas and so on. And it was agreed that the definition is based on carbon storage. So everything that is above this high carbon stock threshold, above 35 tons per hectare carbon storage, is vegetation, forest that should definitely be untouched and not be turned into palm oil plantations. Everything that is below can, under certain conditions, be used for palm oil plantation and other economic activity. All of this is only part of the definition. There's also indigenous land rights, biodiversity, and so on and so forth in there. But we only worked on coming up with an open source approach, an open access approach to come up with maps here. And this is then part of Southeast Asia, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, where we computed this very first publicly available high carbon stock map. And we also had another line of work that from Andres Rodriguez, another PhD of the team, who worked on palm oil mapping, coconut mapping, and palm oil is here in this egg white color. And then you see nicely when you zoom in what palm oil plantation is very close to high carbon stock forest. So here, this is the input Sentinel-2 image. And you see here, there's a lot of palm oil planted along the river. So this is the canopy top height map, and now this is translated to an indicative high carbon stock map. So we translate this using deep nets. We translate canopy top height to carbon stocks. And here you see the different classes and everything that is this greenish to yellowish color. So here, these ones are high density forests, so HDF or medium density forest. And those are areas that should definitely be protected. But we also see that the palm oil plantation here in egg white is just neighboring, just next to it. And this is something, a situation that we wouldn't want. And this is a situation now if companies like Barry Callebaut see this, this is an indication for them that this is a high risk area and they have to check on the ground, and most likely they will move towards no longer buying from palm oil and palm oil mills in this area because the risk of deforestation is just too high. Second application is annual vegetation height maps in Switzerland. So until now, we do area campaigns every 3 to 6 years. It's very expensive to estimate the canopy height, but now we have a cheap version using Nico's canopy height map where they can do every year and check then, for example, for storm damage. And this is the dark black lines here. Those are reference data that storm damage from a big wind throw for cases here of Burglind. This thunderstorm came down, and this was work done by Yuchang Zhang in my UCH team here, validated that. And the third application is that we also use the canopy height map, and now we are also using the biomass map for cocoa mapping, agroforestry mapping, Ghana and Ivory Coast. And we found here that this is the first publicly available cocoa map of good accuracy validated on the ground. And we found here, for example, that official reports with the United Nations underestimate the cocoa planted area in Ghana by 40%. And this then has a lot of policy implications and so on and so forth. Check the paper here for more details. So this brings me to the end. Thank you so much for listening. I think take-home messages are modern data science is key to progress on sustainable development goals. And I always try to highlight on the slides how our projects might contribute to zero hunger or innovation, climate action, life on land. Then Earth observation combined with modern deep learning can provide globally homogeneous and actionable insights for fact-based decision-making. And this is a great game changer, I would say, that if we have modern deep learning and Earth observation data, we can scale. So we have globally homogeneous regions and we can compare between different parts of the world. And then I can only advocate for collaborating across disciplines. So do not only stay on the very technical side. It's great if you publish at NeurIPS or CVPR, but please talk to your social scientists, talk to your colleagues from the United Nations, from FAO, and so on and so forth, such that you understand what are the research gaps that we could also help with from the technical side. So with this, I end my talk. I thank you very much for listening, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jan. It was a very nice, very informative, very motivating talk. I'm pretty sure there will be lots of questions and doubts, maybe curiosities, and also food for thought. Maybe we can start just like, well, waiting for people to warm up. Maybe I have some questions myself and curiosities. Yeah, for example, for the first work that you presented on this snow depth project, right? I was very interested, and I welcome very much your approach on trying to not only focus on prediction accuracy or prediction estimates or mean estimates, right, but also let's say give the problem a probabilistic treatment, right, and providing uncertainty estimates as well. Maybe what it would be really, I would really appreciate is if you could actually give, like, I don't know, a bit more insight, not only techniques, because we can find that in the paper, but maybe more about the calibration of these uncertainties. I don't know, these products will be end up in being used by someone else, right? For something, for exploiting these products that you're generating, and maybe, you know, trusting or not trusting some of the estimates, right? So I was intrigued, but what do you do next, right? Once that you get your predicted mean, your predicted variance, and then I guess that the first question is, okay, are these calibrated uncertainties? Are they trustable or not? Or how do you do that, right? And how do you transmit this information to the end user?
Yeah. So, I mean, so we do the standard approach. We have this expected calibration error curve that we compute. We basically then we test on the reference data. We compare our predicted standard deviation with the root mean square error of our predictions compared to the reference data, and those should be aligned, right? But what you of course see is that if we have a lot of data, we have well calibrated uncertainties. It works really well. But especially in those areas where we have a lot less data, so high snow depth or high biomass, where we have a lot less data, so where our predictions are bad already, our uncertainty calibration is also bad, and also the wrong way. So we are underestimating the uncertainties. So we're actually much worse than our uncertainty would give away, right? And we discuss this in the paper and so on. But this is something that we have to always openly tell our partners that although they are in the sense well calibrated, or the best calibrated that we can calibrate them, they are not perfect, the uncertainties. So for exactly that regime, so the very long tail, the far tail of the distribution, where we need, especially the calibrated ones, there we are worst. And now we of course we are working on this on the technical side, but I think communication, if we move on then to people who want to use it as an application, is key. To say still don't trust it all the way, but take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and in your experience, what do you consider that, I don't know, the final users, let's say, I don't know, national survey organizations, public administration, or even companies, I don't know, what do they really value more? That you provide a model with a high accuracy, or that it is kind of more robust, or at least that you provide this uncertainty estimate so they can really trust or not, right? So
yeah, that's a good question. So when I talk to public administration, they think they want something very accurate, but what they should have is something that is more robust and transparent. So the first thing I start explaining them is, you don't want the most accurate one. You want the most transparent, the most trustworthy one. And then I have to explain them what uncertainties are. and why uncertainties do matter to them, especially because they have to implement policies and rules and make decisions for a large part of our society, and they have to understand the concept of uncertainty. But this is then probably the longest discussion.
Yeah.
Not so much with land surveyors or engineers. They understand from the beginning. But with people in public administration, this is a very important discussion to start very early on. That it's not the most accurate solution that they want, it's the most transparent with uncertainties that they want.
And do they really care? I mean, it is very, very nice and welcome that you guys try to convey some information about the output of the model, right? About the uncertainty. I guess that you're kind of combining or summing up the two sorts of uncertainty, the aleatoric and the epistemic uncertainties. But maybe sometimes what I observed in some applications is that the final user is also worried about the interpretability of these results. No, there is like kind of a reluctancy to use or maybe abuse these models because they are not really let's say interpretable, at least minimally interpretable, right? I'm doing this because of that, right? So I don't know if you experience something similar within your application domain or.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very important question, interpretability of the model decisions. So when we talk to people, this is one of the major reasons why people do not use modern machine learning or deep learning, because they feel it's not transparent. They rather stick with more old school models like random forests, where they can at least do some feature relevance ranking and so on, or boosting or so on. And I think it's a very important issue that we should do much more research on. I know many groups are doing it, also yours, Gustau, and we're looking into that, and Vibana Roche, and many other people are looking into this. I think it's very important. Then also beyond like standard stuff like GradCam or something that visualizes some activation layers and so on. But I also think it's an open question. To me, it's not clear if you have such a super complex model like we had in the second project with this multi-layer RNN with tons of, and how do you actually make that transparent? It's unclear to me. What does it actually see? And then it goes further, right? For the canopy top height estimation of biomass, the underlying question is, what evidence does the model actually pick up to estimate canopy or top height or biomass from only a top view of the canopy of optical image? And the open answer from me is, I don't know. I know it works well because it measures well with reference data. But I can only, through some ablation studies, I know, okay, it does look at the context. Mostly it relies on the shadow pattern. It looks at sort of the chlorophyll content a bit. But maybe there's more. Maybe there's also other things, but I don't know. Yes, and that also, I think it's also an important issue to discuss and to research much more if you want to go into, yeah, I don't know, hypothesis creation using deep learning. Yeah, if you want to introduce physics or any kind of natural laws in there, and I think this is something we should absolutely look into it.
Yeah. Actually, that brings me to another question that I had about these the models that you actually developed, right? In this very nice applications. I don't know if they are provided for free. They are open, I guess, or you can, because I was thinking that in most of the times, well, not for the biomass and the height, but problem, but for other applications, I noticed that you apply it for certain regions in Switzerland, but that would be really, really valuable for other regions. So that brought this idea of transportability of models, right? I know that this is a big question, right? How to make these models transferable to other domains, either in space or time. You want to reuse your model for next year, updating of the survey or the crop production or whatever, and you have to tune or fine-tune these models for new instances where the data distribution changed. So I don't know if you're first, are you dealing with these problems? I mean, are you adapting the model every time that you want to use it for, I don't know, at distant times or distant regions? And if so, I mean, is it better to invest a lot of time doing this kind of transfer models, transfer learning, or it is just better or more convenient just to collect more data and retrain again, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's another question, of course.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation that is going on in the domain, and yeah, it would be really nice to get your view on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's essential that we open source our code, absolutely, to not have other people starting from zero all the time. It's also for reasons of transparency. And I think it's also important because there might also be some bugs somewhere for other people to look at it. Yeah, we are not working in an error-free space. Yeah. So we need other people to check our work. And also, if we can, we provide also the trained models. But of course, sometimes we also run into some barriers. So for biomass mapping, also we are now collaborating a lot with the community that collects a lot of biomass samples on the ground. And there's whole scientific careers built on collecting this data in the field. So there's a lot of people being very reluctant to just openly share this and let us data science people just harvest it and publish all our thousands of papers. And I understand. Yeah. And then there's other issues to that we discussed also when we worked towards global biomass maps or high carbon stock maps. Maybe there's ethical questions attached to some of this too. Should we always release, let's say, and make it open to everyone where all high biomass areas are? Might this then be the logging mafia go to those places, chop down all the trees? I mean, that's a very simple example. Probably they are smarter than that, but there might be other issues. And so there might be other ethical questions connected to this that we have to think and care about. But in general, we should open source our data source, the data, the trained models, and the source codes, and we do that. Then to your second part of the question, what we did is basically we trained a global model for biomass, and now for the cocoa part, we did use that model and fine-tuned that on biomass samples in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, because this just gave much better results. Because the distribution in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana of biomass is just much different from the global distribution. And so this worked much better. So we used this as a pre-trained model, then fine-tuned, because collecting everything again and again is just impossible. I mean, that's always, I think, a bit a too easy answer to all of these questions. Say, look, if our model is bad, go out and collect more reference data. And I say, yeah, but how? We will never scale. We will never scale. We cannot say we have a method, deep learning, that scales, and deep learning that scales. But then we always say, well, but then reference data, someone else does it. Well, no, then we don't scale. Yeah. It's impossible. So, of course, and then there's many technical issues. Yeah. So, of course, foundation models provide a good way to look into this. I'm convinced that physics constraints or combination with also mechanistic modeling in tree growth and so on, combining this with these maps, I think that would be a fantastic thing to investigate. I always thought, sort of, let's say, have a physical deep nets that implement radiative transfer equations, to have the physics directly baked into deep nets and then extract knowledge from satellite images. So I think there's a lot of exciting open research fields. It was a very lengthy answer.
No. It's fantastic. I think that we are here just to talk and to discuss these issues. That I think that there's a lot of interest in the community, and in particular in these global exercises that like the one that you presented with Nico's work. That actually he already gave a talk here in this seminar series. I was there, and I remember asking insistently the same question, right? Because now there is a big, I wouldn't call it controversy, but maybe there's like a hot debate, right, on the validity of these specialization exercises, right, that we see every now and then, right? From sparse measurements, then you train a machine learning model, and then you spatialize it, and you start analyzing the products, but still, I mean, you are learning from a very small data set, and then even, I don't know, you cannot be really sure about the validity of the extrapolation in distant times and distant regions. Also because the way we typically train models are not really prepared for extrapolation, right? And it's an unsolved problem in statistics even, right? So I don't know. I don't know. I think that basically there is only one answer to that problem, that concern is validation, right? So you have to go there and validate that thing. No? So I was really curious about this exercise on the tree height and biomass applications. If there was an issue there, right? On the uncertainty, you showed us some examples in A, B, and C, right? Regions, and they look pretty cool. But I don't know. It's I mean, it is just like validation by the naked eye, right? So just by thought interpretation. I mean, you don't go to the field and start measuring, right? And check that your estimates and your uncertainties can be trusted, right? Or do you?
So no, we did not. But of course, we have reference data using airborne LiDAR data. I didn't show this here. Nico probably showed it. So we have airborne reference data and then also ground truths for canopy height, or now for biomass, from a lot of different sites across the globe. But you are right. Still, we miss out on a lot of different sites. Yeah. And we are just relying, we just have to transparently communicate this is as good as it gets. We want a global solution. And there will definitely be errors. And there will not only be errors in the height estimation or biomass estimation, but also in the uncertainty quantification, especially in the high biomass or high tree regime. And so, for example, we have some connections to people that reach out to us from Chile, for example. They take our canopy height map, they go out into the field and they measure, is it correct or not? They go out with a distance measurement on the island of Chiloé. I'm not sure if you know it. It's a fantastic place. Yeah, so it's and then they say, well, look, they told us you seem to overestimate tree height here, and we say thanks, that's fantastic. But what they then do is that they take our global canopy height model and they correct for that. They do bias correction. I think this is what can be done with the map, and more possibilities have to be explored. You can take the map. And we see that, and what they told us is that the relative distribution is very good of tree height, but there might be some underestimation or some biases at some points. So if you measure locally some places, or you have your local LiDAR flight, then you can correct for the bias and move it around a bit. That doesn't answer the question about uncertainty, of course, right? And we are not at the stage where we then ask people to also validate the uncertainties. That would be the next step, but I think that would be fantastic to do.
Yes, or even maybe, I don't know, there are many different ways to provide uncertainty from a machine learning model. Maybe just like a model intercomparison across different uncertainty estimates. That would be really cool already. I mean, it's the best thing you can do, right? It's trying to collaborate in the models world, I would say.
No, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. The question is just I think for a lot of models, the uncertainties. So when I look at other biomass maps, they are often not computed from one single model, and for good reasons, because one single model might then not solve everything to the best accuracy and so on. But that means that uncertainties, if you look at the uncertainties, I don't know, on the African continent, uncertainties on this in South America, can hardly be compared, because they come from very different input data, different models, and so on. And although everyone says, look, it's both an uncertainty, it will have different biases, the uncertainties, and it will have different noise in there. But ours does not, right? So that's what I was advocating finally for. It's homogeneous. We do errors, we have biases, but it's the same basically across the globe. But this said, of course, if you want a more accurate map, now we understand we probably should not have only one model to globally predict. It might probably make more sense for biomass to train one model, let's say, per ecosystem, or one model per geography or per continent. Then you get more accurate, then you have better calibrated uncertainties for that, but then it's hard to compare between those continents or between ecosystems and so on and so forth. But I think the general message probably is we have to work with uncertainties, and we have to invest more energy and time as researchers to look into how we can calibrate those and then communicate with those who use our downstream applications.
Yes, I think I completely agree. You also mentioned another type of, I would say, transfer, right? Because of the different applications that you were showing were either local, regional, or global scales, no? And you know, transfer across different scales, that's a challenge. But you also mentioned something very interesting, which is transfer eventually across sensors, right? Because you mentioned biomass for the future. Maybe there's like a big opportunity, like ingesting or fusing or combining all kind of sensory data and prepare the pathway to you know, to the deployment in another sensor to come, right? So I don't know if you're advancing into that or somehow, or are you? I guess it is in your agenda because you know, you just blink and there is another sensor flying, right? So
Yes. No, I think we should work with multiple modalities. I mean, we work with Sentinel-2 just because it was a bit easier to start with that. But obviously, like adding ALOS mosaics that now become available on an annual basis in L-band and with quad pole, and so that's great. You really have a physical measurement that looks a bit deeper, not only on top of the canopy, although L-band is still relatively short for that. And others too, I think you should look and combine different modalities. And I also think from a scientific point of view, that's more exciting. And I also do believe that once we advocate for calibrating uncertainties and using deep learning for that, that's one of the strong advantages of this approach, that we don't have to fiddle with all of these different a priori standard deviations for different sensors and have our Bayesian modeling and so on. So no, we use this jointly as input. We either stack it or have different streams as input. And we learn this end to end and have then calibrated uncertainties for the multimodal computation right away. And I think this is a huge advantage because it's so easy. And I'm not saying that it might then be much better something, but this is very easily done. You don't have to explicitly model all the error propagation, all of that, which is, of course, beautiful mathematically, but it's very cumbersome. So we can basically learn this right away. And I think this is one of the huge advantages of uncertainty calibration with deep learning. And I remember when I talked to the Jedi heads, Ralph Dubaya and John Armstrong at the beginning, and I told them, look, what we can do with canopy height estimation. They were not so enthusiastic about the canopy heights. They liked that there is a homogeneous global uncertainty layer. That is interesting.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I think that the time is up. It was really fantastic to have you here to hear about all these very nice applications and studies that you have been developing. It was really fantastic. And now it's time to close the session. And I would like also to thank all the attendees. And thanks for staying with us today. And remember that you can still continue conversations for some minutes more in this neural network area if you're registered first, of course. And that's, I think, it is a good opportunity to follow up this discussion on, you know, on all the aspects that we talk about today in this webinar. And we hope to see you in our next talk, in our next seminar on AI for Earth and Sustainability Sciences. So thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gustau. Take care.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learned something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the eShop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for Good.
The AI for Good Global Summit, convened by ITU, recognizes the joint responsibility of governments, the private sector, United Nations agencies, academia, and others to ensure AI reaches its full potential while preventing and mitigating harms.
and it's a moment that calls for action. And today I'm calling on each of you to use this summit to help the world to better understand what kinds of regulations, what kinds of guardrails we need to put in place right now. So together, let's make it innovative, let's make it safe, and let's make it responsible for all. Thank you very much.